There we go. Welcome to Contemporary Issues today, whatever it is, a sunny day. And we're going to talk today about the Peanuts comic strip and the theology of Peanuts. Hope we have Peanuts fans here today because there is quite a story. If you're not familiar with it, there's a lot of religion and theology and morality, of course, in the messages of Peanuts and other comic strips. So we'll have a fun discussion about that today. Our usual announcements. Please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking. Click on that mute button and then just unclick it when you want to talk. And we are recording this for future playback. And other announcements, news of the week. This week, our big news was Centers for Disease Control announced we can take off our mask from the pandemic. Pretty much in every situation except flying and close travel. And I noticed grocery stores and other stores are announcing now they're taking off their mask mandates, but it's, of course, the right of each private business to require it or not, their own decision. What have you found this week? Friends, what have you found when you've been out shopping since Thursday?
People been wearing masks for the most part. It seems like most of the people were wearing a mask.
Yeah.
It seems Costco, Walmart, they seem like most people were wearing a mask. Probably 10% of the people were walking around without a mask. We found that.
They had the lady on the CDC this morning explain why they did that. By doing that, they want to force those who did not get the vaccine to get it, because we're not going to wear a mask to protect those who do not want to have a vaccine. It's a pressure thing. Hurry up and get your vaccine, or you're going to be exposed to the new risks.
So much going on. We're in that in-between period now. Everybody's figuring out what to do. What, Toby?
This is Dave.
Hi, Dave.
And, do you believe that everybody that goes into those places without a mask is actually going to have had the vaccines? No. Okay, who are the people, the folks who are likely to prevaricate a bit about whether they've had them or not? So they're gonna expose the rest of us because you're not 100% protected. So I think it was I understand that they're trying to put pressure. I think they're wrong. They need some better psychologists.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. I think it's too new. They've gone back and forth, and I'm not criticizing them in a bad way, but let's face it, it's new. They're getting with variances, and I'm wearing mine still, even though I've been vaccinated, because I don't try. There's no way. I don't trust it.
Yeah.
I don't think they know enough. I don't think they know enough.
I haven't heard of one place that's asking to see your vaccination card. You remember how they were saying some weeks ago, oh, you better keep your vaccination card because you'll be carded going into places.
Oh, yeah. Really?
Yeah,
yeah.
Huh.
But nobody, except maybe airlines, I'm not sure, are asking for that at all.
Other countries.
Other countries are, Linda said. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay. But you still got to wear your mask in the airport and the airlines and stuff like that. So public transportation, all that. So,
yep.
I think they should have made those vaccination cards the size of a driver's license, laminated and hard to duplicate.
I agree. They just don't fit in my wallet.
I still don't understand why people don't want to get it. That's beyond me. Why I don't understand the rationale. Someone explain to me why they don't want to. Why these people don't want to get a vaccine?
That's a whole nother discussion, isn't it? Okay. Well, unless there's any other announcements or news, let's talk about the comics. Hope we got some comics fans on today. Anybody else got an announcement or anything about church or questions before we talk peanuts? Okay, we'll just jump in. Can you see my share screen slide there? Good, on the parables of peanuts. This is a little book from 1968, so it's a long time ago, but there have been several books from that era that started out trying to explain what Charles Schulz was intending to do with his little troupe of characters. And this is just one of the books, but I thought it was really cute, and so it'd be good to review. Parables, as we know, are defined as short, simple stories meant to illustrate a religious or moral point. So the parables of Jesus, like the Good Samaritan story or uh, non-religious stories, can all be considered parables if they're trying to illustrate a point. So with this, let's talk for a minute about what we like about peanuts. I want to hear from you all before I go into some discussion presentation about the creator and his background and what he was intending to do. Here's one of my favorite parts of the Peanuts strip was Lucy and her psychiatric help with Charlie Brown and others. It was, I thought, a cute and pointed aspect of it. And also, one of the other ones, frequent theme was poor Charlie Brown. He would always try and kick the football, and Lucy would pull it away at the last second in her tormenting of Charlie, but he never lost his hope, his believing that he could kick that football. Just a simple uh, example of continuing to have hope. Well, tell me, what did you all like about this comic strip? Did you like the characters or the message? What appealed to you about it?
What
Anybody?
appealed to what appealed to me, Steve, was that it seemed like Charlie Brown had a lot of fear. Okay, but he never let it control him really. And you'd often see him in his bed and talking about being afraid or whatever, but he always went forward and did what he was afraid to do.
Good point.
It was a powerful kind of message in there. I thought he always was, but he always
Always
did.
carried on.
He carried
That's
on.
right.
I always liked Linus with his blanket. Are we on mute?
Yes.
Yeah.
It reminded me of one of my kids. That blanket went everywhere with him, and as long as he had it with him, he was good. So, that was Linus.
Yes. And it represented a lot of things to different people too.
I was particularly fond of Pigpen. I'm pretty messy in this with my experience.
The little boy who was always dirty.
Well, and all my desks are like that.
So you related to him. Yeah, we all kind of related to some of the characters that way. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Charles Schulz and what he did here to help us understand what he was trying to do in this comic strip. Charles Schulz was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and grew up in St. Paul. He was the only child of German and Norwegian parents. His uncle called him Sparky after a horse named Sparkplug in a comic strip of that time called Barney Google. I don't know if anybody remembers that from that time, but that was an early connection that Schulz had. Even as a child, Schulz loved drawing and sometimes drew his family dog, Spike, who ate pins and tacks, of all things. And Schulz sent in a picture to the Ripley's Believe It or Not magazine and had it published with the caption, "A hunting dog that eats pins and tacks," owned by Charles Schulz. And his dog had a resemblance to Snoopy, and so became Snoopy in the comic strip. Schulz was a really bright young student. He skipped 2.5 grades and was the youngest in his class in Central High School. in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he applied his drawings to the high school yearbook, but they were rejected. And then 60 years later, there was a 5-foot tall statue of Snoopy that was erected in the school lobby. So he finally got his credit at his old high school. He was drafted into the war, into World War II in Europe, and was a machine gun team leader. His unit saw combat only at the very end of the war, and Schultz said he only had one opportunity to fire his machine gun, but he forgot to load it. And the German soldier that he could have fired at willingly surrendered anyway. So he said that was always an outstanding memory of Charlie Brown that came back later in the comic strip. In 1945, Charles Schultz returned to Minneapolis and started doing cartooning for a Roman Catholic comic magazine. He then submitted his first group of regular cartoons called Little Folks into the St. Paul Pioneer Press newspaper. It was one panel cartoons. So this is an example of 4 separate cartoons in one page, but they had little ideas that were not quite as developed as Charlie Brown. Like this one says, I was almost late for school and I had to run all the way with the hair swept back. So they didn't really have a moral message at that time. He was just developing his cartoon skills. And then in 1950, after the Little Folks cartoons stopped being run in that newspaper, he developed Charlie Brown for the first time with this first strip that was published in 1950 with the United Features Syndicate. So he submitted this cartoon panel and another one with more of the Peanuts kind of characters to the United Features Syndicate. And they said, we like the ones with the other little characters, and we want to call them Peanuts. Schultz didn't like the name Peanuts. He thought it was too insignificant for the important message he wanted to convey in his cartoon strip, but he went along with it anyway. And so he started developing the characters and their messages more specifically. And of course, it wasn't long before he came up with this little cast of characters here. And like Charlie Brown's parents, Charles Schultz's father was a barber and his mother was a housewife. Charles Schultz often felt shy and withdrawn, and in a 1997 interview, he said, I suppose there's a melancholy feeling for a lot of cartoonists because cartooning, like all other humor, comes from bad things happening. So he actually based Charlie Brown on his own experiences and his own youthful loneliness that he had grown up with. He also had an intelligent dog when he was a boy. The dog was a pointer, not a beagle like Snoopy, but family photos confirmed a certain resemblance. So he wrote the dog into the comic strip. Schultz's inspiration for Charlie Brown's unrequited love for the little red-haired girl was an actual girl named Donna Mae Johnson, an art instruction co-worker who he fell in love with. Schultz proposed to her in 1950, but she turned him down and married someone else. Linus and Shermie were also real characters named for his good friends Linus and Sherman. And Peppermint Patty was inspired by one of his cousins on his mother's side.
Steve, question:
Sure.
What was Snoopy based on? Was that based on anything in his real life?
Yeah, that was his dog. That was a pointer, but it looked like a beagle. So
Oh, really? Oh, based on his dog.
drew it based on his own dog, the one that ate pins and tacks and was always doing crazy things.
Yeah, somehow I missed it. Yeah, I think you said that, but somehow I missed it. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Interesting.
Sure. Just to wrap up, a couple more interesting things about Schultz's life. There was a kidnapping attempt in 1988 when two gunmen in ski masks went into the Schultz's home and intended to kidnap his wife, but the attempt failed when their daughter drove up to the driveway and interrupted the crime. Police were called, and the sheriff said it was obviously an attempted kidnap for ransom, but no one was hurt in the incident. So, unusual thing. And art, Charles Schulz always loved art. In his later years, his favorite painter was Andrew Wyeth. He also had a love for classical music, like his character Schroeder. But Schultz's personal favorite was Brahms instead of uh, Beethoven, like Schroeder's was. And according to a 2015 biography of Schultz, his religious faith was complex and personal. He often touched on religious themes in his work, and most obviously and directly in the Charlie Brown Christmas TV special 1965, where Linus directly quoted the King James Version of the Bible. Schultz said that Linus represented his spiritual side. Schultz was reared in a Lutheran family, was active in the Church of God when he was young, and later taught Sunday school in a United Methodist Church in the 60s. He said, or his wife said in later years, I think he was very thoughtful and spiritual. He was never the sort of person who would say, oh, that's God's will, or God will take care of that. I think to him, that was too easy a statement. He thought God was much more complicated than that, and he tried to reflect that in the cartoon strip. Okay, so that's a little about him. And then another thing I found on the internet was that a lot of people said they loved the strip because of the sayings that Charlie Brown came up with, such as in the book of life, the answers aren't in the back. He said, I've developed a new philosophy. I only dread one day at a time. And nothing takes the taste out of peanut butter quite like unrequited love. And sometimes I lie awake at night and ask, why me? And then a voice answers, nothing personal, your name just happened to come up. And sometimes I lie awake at night and ask, where have I gone wrong? And then a voice says, this is going to take more than one night. So a lot of personal reflection of Charlie Brown and a clever, creative way to express his angst with life. New Yorker magazine put it this way: they said why we like Peanuts. The leisurely pace of the characters' comments is essential to the way Peanuts functions as a space for thought. A strip, even one packed with a lot of goings on, unfolds patiently. And they talk about a strip from 1965 that depicts a disagreement on the pitcher's mound where Lucy wants Charlie Brown to brush this guy back, I mean, throw real close to the hitter. But Charlie Brown refuses, and an argument about morality ensues. Charlie has qualms about throwing a beanball and makes him a hypocrite, according to the others. They rush to the plate and they say, what about the early settlers, the way they treated the Indians? Was that moral? What about the Children's Crusade? Was that moral? And so in the last panel, they have 10 players standing around Charlie Brown's perch, which is like a pulpit overrun by parishioners. And the speech balloons above their heads are thick with philosophical reasoning and talk about morality. And it looks like a Last Supper depiction. I thought that was pretty cute and good points, a good example. Okay, let me show you a few of the cartoons that are directly religious. And according to this book, show the three types of parables. There are three basic types of parables. One is the direct parable, which tries to give an example and encourage action. And the example of that is the Good Samaritan parable, and in Jesus saying, stop and help someone in need. It's not hard to figure out. And this is an example here where Linus says twang or goes twang, and Lucy says, "Oh, good grief, he's Robin Hood. If he sees a movie about skin diving, he plays skin diver for weeks. If he sees a movie about mountain climbing, he's climbing on the furniture." And Charlie says, "Why don't you take him to a movie about Albert Schweitzer?" So directly encouraging people to do good. A second type of parable is called the mirror parable, and talks about holding up a mirror to anyone. An example of that is Jesus' story, or the Bible story about the prophet Nathan telling King David to holding up a mirror and showing him about his affair with Bathsheba. So that's a second type. And a third type is one called Raising the Questions parable, where it asks us questions. Instead of having a direct message, it asks us questions. And this is an example of that here. And this is supposedly a cartoon where Schultz was reading about the Pharisees coming to Jesus and asking him questions, and Jesus turned it around on them and asked them many questions. And so in this one, it says, sometimes that Charlie Brown is pretty clever. 3 big boys from the second grade were chasing him today. He ran and ran, and as they got closer and closer, suddenly he organized a discussion group. So that was an allusion to the Jesus questioning the Pharisees, turning it back on them. Okay. Here's one about thought, that Schultz often did cartoons about thought. How can a person decide what he's going to think? Doesn't he have to think first and then decide? You're looking at me with blank eyes. So that was another one where he's trying to convey philosophical thoughts about the process of thinking and religious thought. Here's one about Adam and Eve. And look at what it says here about that. In the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam, of course, a very simple command: don't pick the apple from the tree. But as a result, Adam doing that, he had to suffer for the rest of his life the results. And in this one, Schultz was showing that, saying, "Here, hold on to this balloon for me. Whatever you do, don't let go of it. Snoopy lets go of it." And he says, "Make one mistake for the rest and you have to pay for it for the rest of your life." So Schultz took often stories from the Bible and tried to put them into his current cartoons. And here's one, I'll just do a few more and we can discuss. Here's one from Ecclesiastes. It says, "Life is peculiar. Wouldn't you like to have your life to live over again if you knew what you know now?" So they look at each other and she says, "What do I know now? I'm not sure what it is I know now." And another one. This one is about thinking also. I guess I let too many things bother me. Of course, a frequent concern of Charlie Brown's. I seem to get upset by any little thing I hear. I think I'm going to have to erect some sort of mental fence to keep unpleasant news out of my mind. Don't make it a picket fence. They're really hard to paint. So that was the format for Schultz and many cartoons and comics also, of course, to talk about a moral theme and then make the punchline come in the last cartoon. Last ones here. And then Schultz would swing over into the joy side. He would read something in the Bible about joy, and then he would reflect on it. And the book says that he would really feel joyful about the gospel message, and then he would think, well, we can overdo that too if we're just joyful and we don't actually turn it into action. So this cartoon was a reflection saying that we can dance and we can love the snow, but then let's don't overdo it. Let's keep things in perspective. And finishing up here with these, of course, um, Snoopy and the Red Baron was a frequent topic also. And the Red Baron stood in for evil, all the evil in the world. And Snoopy's saying, aha, there he is. This time I've got you, Red Baron. This time you're mine. Take that. And then, of course, it didn't always work out for Snoopy. And I don't think he ever got the Red Baron, as I remember. But he was always fighting evil, trying to overcome it and make a point about don't let evil exist in the world without opposing it. The devil figure. And a couple more here. Oh, this was kind of an interesting aspect brought out in the book. Jesus as the so-called dog god. That Snoopy represented Jesus in many of the panels. That Snoopy said, poor Charlie Brown, reflecting on humanity itself. Charlie's always worrying about people liking him or whether or not they're going to send him a Valentine. When you're a dog, you don't have to worry like that. Everything is clear cut. Somebody likes you, he pats you on the head. If he doesn't, he kicks you. And the author of this book says that was intended to be a reflection on how clear cut most people were about Jesus. They either liked Jesus or they opposed Jesus. And as the God who came to earth and emptied himself, he was like a dog, the most lowly of the life forms on earth. And so Schultz intentionally, in some strips, made that reference, that comparison to Jesus.
Steve, did he ever come out and say God or Jesus, like literally in the cartoons? Did he ever use the word Jesus or God in these? They seem, very discreet.
Yes. No, I never found that. Not that I ever do, but I will read you a couple quotes here in a minute about what Schultz said about the strips and about religion in just themselves. Last ones here. Love was a frequent topic, of course, in the slides, in the panels. And this one says that Schultz was thinking about the way that love is portrayed in the Bible, and that it should be for all people without reservation, without qualification. So he reflected that in this panel. I'm a friend of all nature. I love people and birds and fish and animals. I love without reservation and qualification. I love even without thinking. So he was taking it to an extreme, showing how he thought children also might talk about love, adding on to the Bible. And this one about the blanket. Like Alice was saying, a lot of people related to that blanket. Linus should have gone without that blanket for a whole week. I'll never last another week, Linus says. I have hot flashes and cold flashes. I gotta have that security blanket. I'm cracking up and nobody seems to care. And so Schultz said he wrote about the security blanket idea because he felt a lot of people had things in their lives that were security blankets that they held on to, either religious dogma or people or anything else that would give them comfort and that they couldn't do without, couldn't change. And that was the idea behind the security blanket. Did that come across to any of you that way in those years, reading about it? I'll do the last black and white cartoon here too. And of course, on the darker side was the theme of loneliness. And Schultz said he often felt lonely in his life and that he reflected that in the cartoon in different ways, including with Snoopy looking up at the stars, saying, I was always impressed by the constancy of the stars. Gives me a feeling of security to look up and know they'll always be there. But then the star falls and that star is gone. And so Snoopy is lonely and feeling like he can't depend on things he thought he could always depend on. So that's another example.
You know, Steve, some years ago for Father's Day, our kids had a star named for Ron. Ron Star. You know,
Oh,
yeah, it's very, very poignant. So that's what this reminds me of. Only I don't know if it's the falling
hope
star.
that one didn't fall. That's funny. Okay, a couple other facts about the strip too. Peanuts was the first major comic strip to feature a minority character. After the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968, Schultz received a letter from a woman asking him to add an African American character to the comic strip. So Schultz added the character of Franklin and debuted in the strip and became the first minority character to appear in a mainstream comic. Some Peanuts editors raised concerns about showing the character together with white kids at school, but Schultz declined to listen to them or change the strip. Another little known fact is that there were never any adults in the Peanuts strip for a reason. Schultz said, I usually say that adults didn't appear because the daily strip was only an inch and a half high and adults wouldn't have room to stand up. Schultz joked. Actually, I left them out because they would intrude in a world where they would not have been comfortable. It would not have fit in the strip. When Peanuts was animated, they needed a voice for the children's teacher, and it was the composer Vince Guaraldi who came up with the idea of using a trombone, and the wah-wah voice was born. I'm not sure why they added that. If you want to hear some of the Peanuts music, jazz music, like Schroeder playing on his piano, ask your smart speaker to play Vince Guaraldi, and it will play a lot of the Peanuts music, which is really good. I love it. Okay, and the security blanket reference, the term security blanket, referring to a fuzzy object a character holds for comfort, was not coined by Schultz, but he's credited with bringing the term to popularity with the character of Linus. When the Oxford Dictionary wanted to add the phrase security blanket as an entry, they wrote to Schultz and asked if he was the first to use the term. And he said, I think it was the readers who actually coined that term after watching Linus for many years. Okay, and then let's stop and break, and then I'll show you the final cartoon here in a little while after it ran for many years. By the way, Charles Schultz, with his drawing skill, made that into an empire, which with merchandising and other revenues, earned him $35 million a year on average for several decades, it said. So he had quite the cartoon empire going in his years until he died in 2000 of colon cancer.
Hi, Chris.
Well, what do you
How'd
think?
it go?
Oh, hello, Linda. There, we're going to mute Linda. Okay. All right, I'm going to look up some of those comments by him about his religious faith. What do you think, though, about that? Did you all follow Peanuts for decades in the papers? And what did you think as you were doing it? Did you make the religious connections, or was it more of a moral lesson for you?
It never occurred to me, the religious. I loved it because they were wholesome and moral, but I never saw the religious connection.
Mhm.
I think his messages were very discreet. I think you really had to be, if that was your thing, you really had to be looking for it. But I think I agree. I don't know who that was that just said that, but I agree. It was wholesome. It was moral. It was kind of easy going, but the messages were very discreet,
Mhm.
which is, I liked it.
Did Charles Schultz say that there was a religious message, or is it other people who made that claim?
Oh, Schultz said he intended to put religious messages in there and tried to make it indirect. One quote, he said, he was asked by a reporter, "Can humor and faith go together?" And Schultz replied, "It's almost a necessity, I think. Those who find no humor in faith are probably those who find the church a refuge for their own black way of looking at life. But humor is actually a proof of faith and that everything is going to be all right with God, nevertheless." So he did intend it. And it said at one point early in his career, he tried to make a cartoon strip out of the Old Testament characters and stories, but he said, "I couldn't make it work. It just didn't come together."
I think I think Schultz certainly had a moral to everything he did, but I think the faith component really came into being when he started developing the Christmas series each year,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I saw Charles Schultz really morph into a spokesperson for faith-based cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is quite moral, but the moral kind of points back to religious stories that we heard in Sunday school and Bible school as kids. So they kind of related, there's some relation between the two without Schultz really spelling it out.
Mhm.
I thought it was pretty valuable. Your grandmas and moms could say, "See what he said? See what Charlie Brown did?"
Yes. And the book explains too that when Schultz proposed the Charlie Brown Christmas special to the network, they said that they liked the idea of doing a Christmas special, but they didn't want to have direct references and quotations from the Bible. It was too religious. And so Schultz said if they weren't going to let Linus quote directly from the Bible and explain the Christmas story, he was not going to allow the show to go on. And they relented and said, "Do it the way you want." So he was an advocate for exactly doing that, Keith, just as you're talking about. Very good. Um, okay. What did you think about, how about other types of comic strips too? Did you all see similar moral stories in other comic strips? Did you follow others?
What about Pogo? We met the
Coco.
enemy and he is us.
That's a good point. Yeah, a lot of them came along after Peanuts and tried to emulate similar styles.
Hmm.
And let's see, here's a list that I found of of the top 4 of recent years that online people said. Calvin and Hobbes. Tiger and the boy Calvin would philosophize, and Hobbes, being his voice of reason, cut the BS in an instant. So they would have same kind of philosophizing moral descriptions. Garfield, the comic strip cat, sarcasm and humor as you watch the greatest journey of a wonderful cat in the greatest house on earth. So Garfield had some of the same styles. Peanuts was rated number 3 in recent surveys of favorite comics. And one of the comments was topics of discussion such as women's athletic talents and human decency remain relevant even in today's times. And number 4, Big Nate, a boy named Nate Wright, a rebellious and energetic 6th grader, and his classmates and teachers. He's a boy with little interest in studies or conforming, and he often ends up in detention. I'm not familiar with that one, but
I'm surprised that Dennis the Menace didn't make it into this group. I just remember that comic strip as well. And I'm not even sure who the author was. I just remember it growing up that he was always getting in trouble or doing something a little crazy.
Did he have a moral to his stories too, or was he just the neighborhood troublemaker boy?
You know what? That's interesting. I wasn't looking for that. So I'd have to go back and relook at those. It didn't strike me that way back then. It was just always kind of entertaining, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I vote for Calvin and Hobbes as the counterpoint to Peanuts, because I think that was I ask people who still reads the comics today. I know I do.
Yeah.
Because there's some great philosophy.
Yes. They still are. Do you read them in the newspaper, online, or the hard copy, Dave?
Well, I've gone to the Post only 2 days a week, so the other 5 I do it online. And but I, there are some great things out there still, and my favorites about life is Plugger. You're a plugger if.
Yes.
And I can do the Plugger.
Yes, so, very good. How about political cartoons too? The overtly political cartoons, really just one panel making fun of current politicians and situations. Yeah. Do you all follow those also?
I didn't like them, and I still don't.
You don't?
They're
Why
so
is that,
negative.
Huh? Too negative?
Very negative.
Uh-huh.
I really miss Denver Post years ago used to have Alvant. He used to be the Denver Post political cartoonist, and he went on to the New York Times. But I really, I get the magazine The Week, and one of the first things I turn to every time is the 2 pages of cartoons for the week, political cartoons for the week, and they're always just spot on.
Yes, I get that too, and so does Ron Puning and some others, and that's just wonderful.
Yeah. What was Gary Trudeau's strip? I can't remember the name of it. Was it Doonesbury?
Doonesbury, right. That was always very current and political.
But so many of them were relegated to the editorial page if they were a little bit too controversial.
Yes. Yes, and that's a whole different, well, similar, but different approach from Peanuts, of course. Much more direct and sarcastic and not subtle in its message.
One of my favorites was The Far Side. Anybody remember
Yes.
that? They were always just hilarious.
Yes, always looked at things from a really different perspective. Yeah, good point, Toby.
Comic strips, I agree, that have philosophy of life in them a lot. As I get older, I can relate to Crankshaft. If you read that in the paper, the elderly gentleman and the cast of characters. And I like Sherman's Lagoon with his cast of sea creatures, all with different personalities. And I think the most successful comic strips are the ones that have a plethora of characters that they can work with.
I thought that Pickles, as I got older, speaking of in Ron's dimension there, Pickles as an older couple was hilarious. It was that frighteningly realistic.
Yeah.
I think the best comics are the ones that you can relate to, that show some maybe bit of your personality or somebody you know, or you know.
Yeah, that's one of the points in this book about Peanuts was it said the characters were affectionate and warm, and you could relate to them, and it was reflected to either about yourself or about somebody that you knew in the neighborhood, and that was an important part of it.
We bought all the Calvin and Hobbes comics, this book really thick, and gave it to our grandson who's 12. He says he has just read it back and forth and back and forth. It's like, yes, he's reading.
Wow, a whole new generation. Yeah.
Yeah, new generation.
Well, it's so popular, such a popular format that I would think it wouldn't completely go out of style and appreciation, even though print newspapers are going out.
For Calvin and Hobbes fans, there is a Facebook group that revives various characters and stories.
Really?
Yeah.
Facebook group. Neat, Linda. Bob, did you start to say something?
I was gonna say, I don't know, maybe it's only me, but I see a correlation between, maybe it was kind of like Ron talking a little bit about this, the characters in these cartoons that you can relate to, and a lot of they can relate to a lot of these characters. But our gang, I see, our gang between the Peanuts comic strip and our gang. I really loved our gang with Spanky and Alfalfa and Buckwheat and I can't think of her name. There was a female character in there too, and because they were similar. Like you had the one that carried the sloppy one. That the message he always had was, no matter what people said to you, they still were true to who they were. They didn't let people try to change who they were. I mean, he always played Beethoven, no matter what people said. He always carried the blanket. I don't care what they said. And, same thing in the Spanky, the Our Gang comic. I don't know. It was interesting. There was some powerful messages in there about.
That's a good connection. Yeah.
I think I like to watch and read about Dagwood and Blondie because it just gave me more humorous things to think about in life.
Dagwood and Blondie, yes. Yes, there were a lot. At one time, there were so many comic strips, they would take up multiple pages. I know in newspaper history, in the 40s, I think it was, maybe 50s, they would have not just one or a half page like they do today, but 2 or 3 pages.
Yeah.
Comic strips. And people, that's the first thing people would turn to first for their daily laugh. Mm-hmm.
I have a really fond memory of sitting on my dad's lap on Sunday morning while he read me the funnies. And, he'd cross his legs and I'd sit in that hole. And, I must have been about 4 years old. So I remember the funnies well.
I remember reading that the newspapers and syndicate companies would get thousands of copycats, trying to be another Peanuts or another Dagwood and Blondie, and they were so popular that people were imitating artists or trying to imitate.
Family Circle is another one that they weren't, from what I can remember, they weren't in as many panels, but it was kind of a statement about an activity or a thing that the family was doing, and that was in the circle with the comment or the punchline or the line that made you think was written underneath. I thought those were always interesting. And they also stuck out differently since they weren't in panels, they were in a circle. So
yes,
interesting from a marketing perspective.
good point, Karen. What was the one that had the Great Dane?
Marmaduke.
Marmaduke. Thank you, Ron. That's right.
Oh, yeah, the dog.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those of us dog owners could relate to the dog cartoon. Yes. Marmaduke.
Yeah. Another one was born 30 years too soon.
Oh.
Somebody whose lifestyle would all of a sudden it was relevant, but it was too late for him by 30 years. And another was alley-oop. Some of those things that these cavemen, the things that were going on were contemporary.
Did you all do like me and my parents did, and cut out some cartoons sometimes and put them on the refrigerator or somewhere for somebody to see, and then we'd share them as a family?
I put them on my office door.
Really?
That was covered with them.
Yep.
I just admire the talent and the creativity to A, draw, and to come up with the lines, the punch line. How concise I just can't talk that concisely and express an idea
Yes.
in 5 or 6 words, that hits,
and some
and
of
it's
them
just remarkable.
Yeah.
Some of them, like Schultz, did it all themselves, came up with the idea and did the drawing himself, and others subcontracted the drawing out to an artist and just did the ideas.
As we've been talking about these, I've been doing some Googling. It seems like many of these started in the 50s and 60s. Any idea why that time frame was, I don't know if this is the right word, notorious for launching so many of these cartoon strips? Any idea, anybody? Steve?
Well, it's a period just after a big war, and people had to kind of live their lives a little differently, but they had to adjust.
Well,
I mean, World War II just finished a few years before that.
Yeah, the 60s were so tumultuous. Maybe there was so much going on that spawned some of these. I don't know. Just I was just curious to see so many of them had launched during that period of time.
50s,
Probably
and 60s were the biggest age for comic books, superhero, and the other comic books with, Looney Tunes, those kind of things. Dell Comics.
And the comics coming to TV and film.
Now the comic book is almost faded away. You can get some in comic book stores, but there's no comic books hardly to be found in grocery stores or many places anymore.
Have those morphed into the graphic novels, Ron? Kids today draw what they call graphic novels.
Yeah, no, you're right. Those sell very well.
Very good. Okay, we just got a few more minutes left. Let me share with you the last couple of slides here. One is the final Peanuts strip. And it was published on the day that Charles Schultz died. a few hours after he died. It was just coincidental timing. And he had written this one that said, Charlie Brown's getting a call, somebody for Snoopy. And Charlie Brown says, I think he's writing. And Snoopy says, Dear friends, I've been fortunate to draw Charlie Brown as friends for 50 years. It's been the fulfillment of my childhood ambition. Unfortunately, I'm no longer to maintain the schedule demanded by a daily comic strip. My family does not want Peanuts to be continued by anyone else, so I am announcing my retirement. I've been grateful for the loyalty of our editors and wonderful support of our fans for the comic strip. Charlie, Lucy, Snoopy, how can I ever forget them? Charles Schulz. So that was cute. And finally, on the internet, I found the comment that said, sadly, due to the evolution of how people are getting their news, the funny papers are a dying breed. More and more people are hitting online for their news, and the circulation of newspapers has dwindled. As a cost-cutting measure, comic strips are usually one of the first things to go, either shrinking the section or doing away with it altogether. Luckily, you can still enjoy all of your favorites online. There are two primary sites where you can go get your newspaper strip fix online, Go Comics or Comics Kingdom. Both are updated every day and allow readers to read thousands of strips from a wide variety of series. They also offer a community element where readers can discuss strips with like-minded fans, which is what Linda Daniel was just talking about. So that's good to know. We can get our comic strip fix still in today's age. Anybody do that besides Linda? I haven't gone online to look them up, but I think I will. That'll be fun. That'll be fun to see. Any final thoughts? Favorites we haven't mentioned?
My mother had a favorite and it was called Love Is. And the one that she put on our refrigerator was Love Is when you let your husband put his airplane in the garage. And at the time, my dad had put his airplane in our garage so we could strip it and repaint it.
Is that true, Joe? Yes. You're muted there, Joe. That's a good story.
Yeah, that's true.
You were a flyer who had your airplane in the garage.
Yeah.
Joe, did you have a favorite cartoon strip?
Not really. I didn't follow it very close at all.
Very good.
I put one on our fridge every Christmas because I've laminated it. It's two dogs drinking out of the Christmas tree. And one is saying to the other, and I can't say it quite right, it has the fine bouquet of light oak, like a wine snob would do, but just a whiff of the toilet.
With a whiff of toilet. That's cute, Toby. Well, thank you, everybody, for a fun discussion about all kinds of comics. We'll have to go back and look them up.
Thanks.
Take care.
Good job.
Steve.
Okay, we'll see.
Steve, great
You
job.
bet.
It's always fun.
It was a
Take
wonderful
care.
time.
Good job.
Glad you enjoyed it. Me too.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Bye.